Welcome to English Mirror. Today, we analyze the essay The Fetishism of Commodities and the Secret Thereof by Karl Marx. The theory of commodity fetishism is presented in the first chapter of Das Kapital at the conclusion of the analysis of the value form of commodities to explain that the social organization of labor is mediated through market exchange, the buying and the selling of commodities. Let's look at the text. Karl Marx proposes a theory of historical development that bases the motor of social change on the means of production. The major events in history are to be determined as a function of the various interests that follow from a given means of production. Thus, when in the manifesto Marx says all of history is the history of class struggle, he means just that class struggle follows directly from the means of production and is the very source of history. Karl Marx's strategy is to show that under the best of all possible capitalist worlds, the system must eventually fail. The system itself is self-contradictory, that is, it contains within it elements that must lead to the destruction of the whole. The central question of capital as a whole is how is profit possible if everything is exchanged for exactly what it is worth? How in the system as a whole can profits ever be gained? A commodity is an object outside us, a thing that by its property satisfies human wants of some sort or another. It is something useful that is exchanged. To become a commodity, a product must be transferred to another, whom it will serve as a use value by means of an exchange. Whoever directly satisfies his wants with the product of his own labor creates indeed use values but no commodities. In order to produce the latter, that means commodities, he must not only produce use value but use values for others, social use values. Use value is the satisfaction of wants that a commodity can provide. The use value of a coat is to keep us warm, of food to sustain us, etc. Marx points out that this use value can be either from necessity or fancy, such as fads, etc. The concept of use value can be transformed into the language of modern-day neoclassical economics to demand. The demand for a good is equal to its use value. Marx makes the obvious point that two objects exchanged for each other must share something equal, that is what allows for exchange. And the not so obvious point, exchange value is only the mode of expression, the phenomenal form of something contained in it, yet distinguishable from it. As use values, commodities are above all of different qualities, but as exchange values, they are merely different quantities and consequently do not contain an atom of use value. Along with the useful qualities of the products themselves, we put out of sight both the useful character of the various kinds of labor embodied in them and the concrete forms of that labor. There is nothing left but what is common to them all. All are reduced to one and the same sort of labor, human labor in the abstract. Commodities then consist of the mere conjugation of homogeneous human labor. A use value or useful article therefore has value only because human labor in the abstract has been embodied or materialized in it. How then is the magnitude of this value to be measured? Plainly, by the quantity of the value creating substance, the labor contained in the article. The quantity of labor, however, is measured by its duration, and labor time in its turn finds its standard in weeks, days, and hours. We see then that which determines the magnitude of the value of any article is the amount of labor socially necessary or the labor time socially necessary for its production. The value of a good is equal to the human labor put into it. This is known as the labor theory of value. In a community of commodity producers, the qualitative difference between the useful forms of labor that are carried on independently by individual producers, each on their own account, develops into a complex system, a social division of labor. The other main point to make is that the process of laboring is socially embedded through exchange. Labor only has value in exchange, only through its position in the social division of labor. The fetishism of the commodity and its secret thereof is the fourth and final section of the first chapter on the commodity, the keystone of Marx's critique of the capitalist mode of production. The section on commodity fetishism provides a way to think about the commodity status of art and the concept of reification more broadly. Marx turns to fetishism to make sense of the apparently magical quality of the commodity. A commodity appears at first sight an extremely obvious, trivial thing, but its analysis brings out that it is a very strange thing, abounding in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. Fetishism in anthropology refers to the primitive belief that godly powers can inhere in inanimate things. Marx borrows this concept to make sense of what he terms commodity fetishism. As Marx explains, the commodity remains simple as long as it is tied to its use value. When a piece of wood is turned into a table through human labor, its use value is clear, and as product, the table remains tied to its material use. However, as soon as the table emerges as a commodity, it changes into a thing which transcends sensuousness. The connection to the actual hands of the laborer is served as soon as the table is connected to money as the universal equivalent for exchange. People in a capitalist society thus begin to treat commodities as if value inhered in the objects themselves rather than in the amount of real labor expended to produce the object. As Marx explains, the mysterious character of the commodity form consists, therefore, simply in the fact that the commodity reflects the social characteristics of men's own labor as objective characteristics of the products of labor themselves, as the socio-natural properties of these things. What is, in fact, a social relation between people, between capitalist and exploiter laborers, instead assumes the fantastic form of a relation between things. This effect is caused by the fact that in a capitalist society, the real producers of commodities remain largely invisible. We only approach their products through the relations which the act of exchange establishes between the products. We access the products of the proletariat through the exchange of money with those institutions that glean profit from the labor of the proletariat. Since we only ever relate to those products through the exchange of money, we forget the secret hidden under the apparent movements in the relative values of commodities, that is labor. It is precisely this finished form of the world of commodities, the money form, which conceals the social character of private labor and the social relations between the individual workers by making those relations appear as relations between material objects instead of revealing them plainly. In capitalist society, gold and then paper money become the direct incarnation of all human labor. Much as in primitive societies, the totem becomes a direct incarnation of Godhead. Through this process, men are henceforth related to each other in the social process of production in a purely atomistic way. They become alienated because their own relations of production assume a material shape which is independent of their control and their conscious individual action. Although value ultimately accrues because of human labor, people in a capitalist system are led to believe that they are not in control of the market forces that appear to exist independently of any individual person. The situation differed in feudal society. In such a society, we find everyone dependent serfs and lords, vassals and suzerains, laymen and clerics, because relations of personal dependence form the given social foundation. There is no need for labor and its products to assume a fantastic form different from the reality. They take the shape in the transactions of society, of services in kind and payments in kind. Transactions in feudal society involve the particular of labor rather than the abstract universal equivalent necessary for commodity production. Marx therefore concludes that whatever we may think of the different roles in which men confront each other in such a society, the social relations between individuals in the performance of their labor appear at all events as their own personal relations and are not disguised as social relations between things, between the products of labor. Here, Marx is contrasting what others have said about where value comes from to where he thinks it comes from. According to standard economics at the time, Marx argues value and commodities were produced by the nature of things, particularly land and money. Marx argues that these things can have no value because they have no vitality, no ability to change. A commodity is therefore a mysterious thing, simply because in it the social character of men's labor appears to them as an objective character stamped upon the product of that labor. Commodities become capital when they become productive. This division of a product into useful things and a value becomes practically important only when exchange has acquired such an extension that useful articles are produced for the purpose of being exchanged, and their character as values has therefore to be taken into account beforehand during production. That commodities are exchanged is a surface illusion. What are really exchanged, according to Marx, are social relations. The determination of the magnitude of value by labor time is therefore a secret, hidden under the apparent fluctuations in the relative values of a commodity. The process of economic exchange creates a web of the social exchange of labor. Marx likens this discovery to the discovery of gravity. It has always been there, but never recognized for what it is. Because people have started with commodities as fixed values, they have missed this in earlier analysis. This is particularly hard to see when we consider money as a constant. It is, however, just this ultimate money form of the world of commodities that actually conceals, instead of disclosing, the social character of private labor and the social relations between the individual producers. Treating commodities as having inherent value is just like a religious belief, and Marx argues has the same result. the creation of an external force to dominate us. He also points out that the transformation of direct labor to free labor is a historical process that rests on the complexity of work. A fetish is a man-made object that has been invested with certain properties. The object is perceived to be animated with power and influence. In fact, these properties have been transferred to the object by humans, who lose their own power in the process. Marx uses the metaphor of the fetish to demonstrate that humans misperceive the social relations between people in their labor as material relations between persons and social relations between things. The concept of commodity fetishism can therefore be applied to other forms of reification, where abstract concepts are objectified in physical things that are considered to have intrinsic value. Marx was well acquainted with the fetish since the early 1840s and had written about it on numerous occasions as he developed the idea that would later be published in Capital. Commodity fetishism is a collective belief that it is natural and inevitable to measure the value of useful things with money. Marx coined the term to mock political economists who believed that carefully studying economic systems would eventually yield a set of natural laws comparable to those found in physics or chemistry. Marx was convinced that most economics barely scratch the surface of economic reality because they were entranced by its elaborate symbolism: money, debt, property rights, prices, and in our time, ever more complicated methods for computing risk. For Marx, the important truths of economics could all be found in the gritty process of production, in the places where people actually worked and lived. From the roaring machinery of the factory to the rat-infested hovels of the urban proletariat, from the collapse of rural social life to the actual distribution of natural resources, the most important aspects of capitalist society were all traceable back to political domination by a small class of property owners. The challenge for anyone who wants to radically change the world is to dispel the magical aura of the market and the attendant myth of human impotence. Markets don't have power or agency, people do. Thank you for watching this video. If you like the video, please share and subscribe.